Every election forces us to re-examine many of the assumptions we've been making about voting behavior. The 2016 election brought widespread recognition of the education gap among white voters, those with a college degree preferring Democrats and those without voting overwhelmingly Republican. But even as pollsters and pundits admitted that not weighing on education was a significant source of error in polling in 2016, there was little effort made to examine whether this same dynamic was showing up among voters of color. In digging through the 2020 voter data provided by the Democratic data firm Catalyst, even as Biden was able to slightly improve on Clinton's showing with white non-college voters, Democrats suffered from a major drop-off in support from non-college voters of color. In 2016, according to the data from Catalyst, Clinton took 81% of the vote from non-college voters of color. In 2020, Biden took 75% among this group, a 6-point drop. While it's hard to characterize a 75% showing as weak, Democrats' heavy reliance on voters of color means that the party can't afford many more losses among this demographic group in upcoming elections. Democrats' long-term viability in Sunbelt states like Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina require more than just winning over white suburbanites and not losing any more ground with white non-college voters. They have to continue to run up the score with voters of color as well. As with white voters, there is also a decent gender gap among voters of color, both among non-college and college-educated voters. But the drop in support among women, both college and non-college educated for Democrats between 2016 and 2020, was even more significant. For example, while Biden did 5 points worse among non-college men of color and 2 points worse among college-educated men of color than Clinton, he performed 5 points worse among college-educated women and 7 points worse among non-college women. While many suspected that Trump's appeal was unique to male voters of color, the data shows that he gained among women voters of color too. Further, unlike white voters, the education gap among voters of color shrunk, not expanded, over the last 8 years. During the Trump era, the conversation about growing support from Democrats from white, college-educated voters was discussed all too often. And to no one's surprise, Biden carried white, college-educated voters by a 17-point margin, 54% to 37%, an 11-point increase from Obama's 2012 showing. But among voters of color, Democrats' once small advantage with non-college voters disappeared in 2020. And while Democrats lost some ground with college-educated voters of color as well, it was not as steep as it was with non-college voters, 3 points versus 6 points. However, what might worry Democrats is the fact that non-college voters of color are a growing share of the electorate. In 2020, non-college voters of color outnumbered college-educated voters of color by a 2-to-1 margin. That said, voters of color are a smaller share of the electorate, and as such, they make up a smaller percentage of respondents in a traditional poll. The smaller the size of the demographic group, the harder it is to break that group into smaller chunks, like by education or specific racial categories. Ultimately, at the national level and in key battleground states in the Midwest, white non-college educated voters remain the largest share of the electorate, and it should be pretty clear by now that Democrats can't afford to lose more ground with these voters. However, this group is also slowly shrinking while the share of voters of color without a college degree continues to grow. Given how close races in states like Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, and Florida will continue to be in the near future, understanding the intentions and motivations of both types of voters will be critical for both parties to win elections. That is all for today's EPO video. I hope you all enjoyed. Please make sure to follow EP Official on all social medias shown on screen, and please do like the video down below and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you all so much for watching. Check out more content from my channel here on your screen and tune in next time. EP out.